Hey, what's up, guys? Hope you're all doing well.
In the year 1785, there were 6 patients lying in beds inside the Royal Infirmary in Edinburgh. At that time, it was one of the largest and most modern hospitals in Scotland. But the room this woman was in was very small and very frightening. The walls were bare, the floor was empty. There was only a single window looking outside. There was almost no furniture in the room except for the middle bed she was lying on. It felt less like a hospital room and more like an isolated prison cell. The woman gripped the iron frame of the bed with both hands. She was sweating heavily and screaming in a way that could make anyone freeze in place, as if her body were being torn in half. Around her bed stood several nurses, tense and anxious, waiting to see what would happen next. She was in labor. She had been in labor for hours, and there was still no progress. Giving birth in the 18th century was completely different from today. There was no anesthesia. There were no real methods to relieve pain. At most, they might give the mother a small amount of opium or alcohol to dull the agony. Childbirth was also far more dangerous for women at that time. Today, for example, in Britain, the maternal death rate is very low, about 13 deaths for every 100,000 births. But in the 18th century, the rate was roughly 30 times higher. Women died during childbirth again and again. One major reason was poor medical hygiene. Doctors and nurses did not properly wash their hands between patients. Diseases and bacteria spread easily, and if serious complications occurred, there were very few solutions available. So when this woman was taken to the hospital, she was terrified. She knew the risks, but she had no choice. She had to give birth there. At first, everything seemed normal. They placed her in the room and laid her down on the metal bed. The nurses reassured her, telling her that everything would be fine. But after some time, complications began. They urged her to push harder, to scream, to force the baby out. But there was no progress. The baby would not come. After examining her, they realized the fetus was too large to pass through her pelvis. It was obstructed. This was now a life-threatening emergency. Both the mother and the child were in real danger. Today, doctors would perform an emergency cesarean section with a high success rate. But in 1785, a cesarean operation was almost a death sentence for the mother. It was typically performed only if the mother was already dying. That is why they were terrified to attempt it. The room descended into chaos. The mother was screaming in unbearable pain. She could not continue. One of the nurses suddenly left the room to find help. Minutes later, she returned with a doctor. His hair was powdered white, and his expression was serious. They entered the room and saw the terrifying scene. Blood stained the sheets, and the mother was still screaming in agony. The doctor approached her calmly and told her everything would be fine. He said he had developed a new invention, a tool that could save her life and her child's life. Dr. John Atkin was one of the most respected physicians in the hospital. He was a pioneer in obstetrics. He constantly searched for ways to reduce pain and lower mortality rates. He had created a new instrument specifically for cases like this, when the baby was obstructed. The mother was overwhelmed with pain and barely able to focus. But when she heard the doctor say she and her baby would survive, she clung to that hope. The doctor left the room and returned with the instrument. The moment she saw it, she froze in fear. The tool looked horrifying, cold, metallic, and intimidating. The woman who had just trusted him now felt her fear multiply. She tried to pull herself away, but the nurses restrained her. The doctor instructed his team to begin. The pain was already unbearable.
When he used his invention, the agony intensified beyond anything she had felt before. It was as if her body were being split apart. And then, suddenly, just as she felt she could not survive another second, she heard the cry of her child. Her son was born alive. She survived. The procedure was called a symphysiotomy. The name refers to cutting the joint at the front of the pelvis, specifically the cartilage that connects the two pelvic bones, in order to widen the birth canal and allow the baby to pass. It was an extremely painful and frightening procedure, but Dr. Atkins' instrument allowed the cut to be smaller and more controlled, increasing the chances of survival, even though the pain remained intense.
Although the device looked like something from a torture chamber, it spread rapidly. It was used in many hospitals until cesarean sections became safer in the early 20th century. Eventually, the tool disappeared from medical practice. But interestingly, another profession later found a use for similar cutting mechanisms: carpenters. The cutting principle inspired tools used for woodworking. In fact, this early mechanical concept would later influence the idea behind the electric saw. One summer night in 1904, a young woman named Anna Gray was sleeping in her bed on the second floor of a small hotel in Chicago. She was trying to sleep. She felt uncomfortable. Her stomach ached slightly from food she had eaten earlier. The room felt suffocating. There was no ventilation, no airflow. Frustrated, she threw off the covers and walked to the window. She opened it to let in fresh air. The cool breeze gave her slight relief. She stood there for a moment, feeling calmer. Then she returned to bed and fell asleep. Hours later, she suddenly woke up. For a brief second, she didn't remember where she was. Then she recalled she was in Chicago, staying at the hotel. But something felt wrong. She couldn't explain it. The room seemed normal, silent, still. Then her eyes drifted to the open window, and she froze. A man was sitting on the edge of the window frame, staring directly at her. He didn't blink, he didn't move, just stared. Her heart raced, thoughts flooded her mind. Is this real? Is he going to hurt me? Instead of screaming, instead of freezing, she did something unexpected. She attacked him. She leapt from the bed and shoved him. Strangely, he didn't resist. He simply fell backward, out the window. Terrified, she rushed to look down. But there was no body, no blood, no one, nothing. Then she noticed a long, dark vehicle parked under a street lamp. Inside it sat a man. He looked up at her. It was the same man. He raised his hand slowly, gesturing for her to come down. And then she realized it was a hearse, a vehicle used to transport the dead. Panicked, she slammed the window shut. The next day, she went shopping at a large department store. Later, she waited for an elevator. When the elevator doors opened, it was full. A man inside motioned for her to enter. She looked closer. It was him, the same face. She refused to get in. Moments later, the elevator cable snapped. The elevator crashed. People inside died. Was it coincidence? A nightmare? A vision? The story was later reported in newspapers. On July 5, 2008, a 50-year-old man named David Fire returned to his apartment in Bishopstoke, southern England. He was the last resident in a once busy housing complex of 72 apartments. The other 71 were abandoned. The company that owned the complex, Atlantic Housing, planned to demolish it. All residents accepted relocation assistance, except David. He refused to leave. After a 2-year legal battle, the court ordered his eviction. David was furious. That afternoon, he purchased a rope, an electric timer, and a powerful electric transformer. When police arrived later, alerted by his worried parents, they heard a strange mechanical sound coming from inside the apartment. They broke down the door. Inside, they saw a horrifying scene. David had set up an electric cutting device attached to a table. He placed his neck beneath the blade. The timer activated the machine. He had taken his own life as a final act of protest. His story shocked Britain. Despite the attention, the housing complex was eventually demolished.
And that brings us to the end of today's stories. If this video disturbed you, if it made you think, make sure you like the video and share it. And turn on all notifications so you don't miss what's coming next, because the next stories are even darker. I'll see you soon.